Live right here on a Tuesday morning on the early line on SportsGrid. It is the day following, the day after the end of the NFL regular season, a Monday following the final weekend slate of the regular season known as Black Monday, where a lot of head coaching jobs are up for grabs and maybe in changing hands. We really only saw one dismissal on Monday. That was early on Monday morning. Doug Pederson being let go after 3 years in Duval County and a 22-29 record. But outside of that, the biggest news of the day was the Giants holding on to Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. That can be a part of the carousel as well, Joe Ranieri. All of the moving parts, even when those parts are staying in the same place. We know the Chicago Bears are looking for a new head coach, firing Matt Eberflus back in the regular season. And as we got word yesterday from ESPN's Adam Schefter, the Bears have sought permission to interview Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy and are awaiting a response from Dallas. If the Cowboys don't allow permission this week, no worries. The Bears could interview McCarthy after his exclusive negotiating window with Dallas expires on January 14th. That is exactly 1 week from today. His exclusive negotiating window, what is that legal jargon? It just means that Mike McCarthy no longer has a contract with the Cowboys organization as of next week.
The whole thing is very, very weird. But to be fair, the Bears also requested interviews from, I believe, Todd Monken. So there's a few guys there still. They seem to be interviewing everyone like the Jets do here. But I'm going to be very interested to see if this moves the needle with Jerry. Does this make Jerry want to hurry up and maybe sign him, work out a deal? It wasn't like Jerry set him up for success. I mean, they didn't do anything in the offseason to improve the roster, but they also didn't extend him. So I don't know what any of it means in Dallas with Jerry calling the shots right now.
And that's the key, Joe. And that was one of the biggest storylines in my estimation entering this 2024 NFL season. The offseason fiasco that was Dallas. They didn't acquire a new running back to really replace Tony Pollard or the shell of Ezekiel Elliott for a very, 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 very long time, even deep into training camp and in the preseason with the regular season on the horizon. Dak Prescott was unpaid. CeeDee Lamb was unpaid, understanding that Micah Parsons' pay tab would be on the horizon this offseason as well if they wanted to be shrewd in their financial decisions and get in front of it. But outside all of that, it was the fact that head coach Mike McCarthy was on the warmest seat we have ever seen in the NFL. That if this season was a failure, and it was, I guess you could point to the quarterback injuries for Dak Prescott and say that was the reason. Even with Dak in there, it was a disaster in Dallas. That if Mike McCarthy stumbled, he would not be brought back. Jerry made that very clear at the end of last year's first-round exit, losing at home to the Green Bay Packers in 13 postseason trips since 1995, the Cowboys' last Super Bowl, without even reaching the NFC Championship game. So I'm not exactly sure what the plan is for Dallas, except the same thought, Joe, that we all had entering the year, that Mike McCarthy has coached his last game as the Cowboys' head coach. But now there's some reports that maybe Jerry is having the confidence in McCarthy once again.
Yeah, I can't wait to see because there's still a lot of holes on this roster. Now, again, Ben, if you're willing to give him, all things being equal, I'm willing to give, with all the injuries on the defense and offensive side of the ball this year that Dallas had to go through and all the question marks and everything else, I'm willing to give McCarthy the benefit of the doubt and say, listen, a lot of the reason why this team was as bad as they were in many stretches really had nothing to do with Mike McCarthy. I can make that argument, but whether or not that moves the needle with Jerry remains to be seen.
Right, and that's the case, Joe. It wasn't all on Mike McCarthy this year. A lot of outlier factors, if you will, but it still is a dismal season for the Dallas Cowboys. So as we said, Black Monday not nearly as bleak as it often can be, but on Sunday afternoon, after the Patriots beat the Bills at home in their season finale to squander the chance to draft first overall, or at least acquire a ton of draft assets for that first overall pick, Robert Kraft made the move to fire Gerard Mayo after his only year as the head coach of this Patriots organization. Here was the owner of the Pats yesterday on what lies ahead in this offseason and the reasons behind his decision.
I'm going to be very brief here and say this whole situation is on me. I feel terrible for Gerard because I put him in an untenable situation. I know that he has all the tools as a head coach to be successful in this league. He just needed more time before taking the job. In the end, I'm a fan of this team first, and now I have to go out and find a coach who can get us back to the playoffs and hopefully championships.
I mean, I guess it's refreshing to hear the owner take some onus. I disagree with the notion Gerard Mayo was not ready to be a head coach. He was a longtime defensive assistant under Bill Belichick. If you said you set him up for failure, that's true. He was the scapegoat between a legend who was there for 2.5 decades in hoping to be better. The Patriots won 4 games this year. Not a good season. Second consecutive year in Foxborough, only winning 4 games. That's unheard of for this Patriots organization that we have known over the last 2 decades. But Joe, the win total for New England entering the year was the lowest in the NFL at 4.5. It wasn't like Gerard Mayo was a disaster as a head coach in his debut season.
I would have rather he just go up to the podium and say, we're going to make this brief. I'd like to welcome Mike Vrabel back to the Patriots family as the new head coach of the Patriots. Like, what are we doing here? Like, stop spitting in our face and telling us it's raining here, Ben. You don't make this move if you don't know that Vrabel wants the job. Let's be honest here.
And that is really it. From one former Patriot linebacker to another, that will probably be the next news conference we see in New England. More NFL headlines next. It is coaching carousel time in the National Football League, and not just head coaches, but assistant coaches, otherwise known as coordinators. And a couple were fired and let go from their franchises yesterday. A couple of very familiar faces. First in Cincinnati, one time one of the hottest DCs in all of the NFL, Lou Anarumo, after the Bengals mightily struggled on the defensive side of the football, which ultimately cost them a playoff berth, was let go yesterday in Cincy. Gus Bradley, defensive coordinator in Indianapolis, a really bad year defensively for the Colts. He was fired as well. Ryan Grubb, in his first year in Seattle, the offensive coordinator a year ago with the Washington Huskies under Kalen DeBoer, that was going to follow DeBoer to Tuscaloosa before being hired in the Northwest by Mike McDonald and those Seahawks, also fired yesterday. And early yesterday, or maybe even Sunday, I think it was Sunday because the Browns played on Saturday, Ken Dorsey let go by the Cleveland Browns as well.
Yeah, the thing that shocked me the most was the Lou Anarumo, who will be unemployed for about 30 minutes, Ben. I can already imagine the phone lighting up here on teams that will take him. As if it's his fault that Cincinnati organization backed themselves in a corner and decided, well, we have to pay receivers and Joe Burrow, and, well, we can't afford anybody on the defensive side of the ball, so go ahead, Lou, have a good time with this. That's just a precursor to Taylor being the next one that's tossed. That's usually how this sequence works.
It's almost like you have to do something when the season is that disappointing, and Lou Anarumo was the guy to get got. Some reports entering the regular season finale on Sunday that multiple NFL teams are inquiring about Kevin O'Connell's contract and his job status, maybe hoping to trade. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Trade for the Vikings head coach. I guess that's what happens when you lead Minnesota to a 14-win season with Sam Darnold as your quarterback. Kevin O'Connell saying yesterday that Minnesota, being in the Twin Cities, is exactly where he wants to be. An interesting situation nonetheless.
Yeah, it almost as if his the agency representing him somehow got a story leak that people want to trade for him just before they begin negotiating an extension on his contract. Funny how that works there, Ben, like that story. Shocking.
Listen, PR departments of agencies, they work overtime, and they work very, very well. Ezekiel Elliott wants to play for a contender. That's not the Cowboys. Signed to the Chargers practice squad. We'll see what that means. Former Buckeye with Jim Harbaugh? Interesting development there. Deshaun Watson reportedly suffering a setback rehabbing his Achilles. Joe, that's important, not because Deshaun Watson is expected to be the starter week number 1 any longer for the Browns, but if he were to miss 2025, if he is not physically ready, it saves the Browns a huge burden in terms of the money that Watson is owed.
Yeah, and I would expect him not to be available come the start of next season here, Ben. There is a lot going on behind the scenes with this, that's for sure.
I'll just say, the real thing is that's the story, the memes of Andrew Berry, the GM for the Browns, picking up Watson from rehab and dumping him down the stairs. That was rather humorous. Joe, as you made mention, too, it almost feels like the coaching carousel is really just starting to spin. Some moves we might have expected or speculated during the regular season, even at the end of it, haven't happened, including in Las Vegas for first-year Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce. How comfortable does Pierce feel about his job? Let's hear from the guy himself.
I'll ask you again, do you have any clarity on what's happening next year about your job status?
I haven't been told anything different.
Do you want to get that cleared up ASAP, or do you?
It's only coming from the outside. It's not inside the building. So, to me, there's nothing to clean up until I hear it from inside the building.
Joe, what do you think? Is Antonio Pierce going to be coaching in Sin City to start 2025?
Probably, unless, again, see, here's the problem, Ben, is that how many quality upgraded coaches, right? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. How many quality coaches are there that would be an improvement over Pierce that actually want to work for the Davis family?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, right? And the players tend to believe in Antonio Pierce. It's why he was elevated from interim to permanent head man last offseason as well. Plenty more around the National Football League. Time to talk about the Jets next. Live right here on this Tuesday on the early line on SportsGrid. So much to update you around the National Football League. Later on in the show, we begin our previews and breakdowns, the early lines on the early line for the playoffs beginning around the NFL. But before the postseason, it's the offseason already for 18 organizations around the league. And Joe, currently, including the Cowboys' expiring contract next week with Mike McCarthy, there are 5 head coaching vacancies around the NFL. 3 of them happened during the regular season, including, of course, the New York Jets. A lot of questions for Woody Johnson and family to figure out this offseason. Quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and of course, head coach and general manager. Here are some head coaching candidates that have been reported for Gang Green as of this moment. Aaron Glenn, the talented defensive coordinator of the Lions. Brian Flores, who put together a masterpiece of a year in Minneapolis. Arthur Smith, former Falcons head coach and current offensive coordinator of the Steelers. Matt Nagy, former Bears head coach, current OC in KC. Bobby Slowick, who last year was the hottest guy in town, it's kind of dropped off a little bit. And Josh McCown, former NFL quarterback, currently working under Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. Plus a slew of others, including one interview that is happening today, a familiar face and name for this Jets franchise, Rex Ryan. Welcome back to East Rutherford or Florham Park, perhaps.
Yeah, we didn't have enough room to also put Mike Cardano, Greg Sussman, I believe Mike Blewett was on there, Joe Freeze. I mean, anybody and everybody within a 30-mile radius of MetLife has actually gotten an interview for the New York Jets. And, oh, yeah, by the way, we're still no closer to finding a general manager who actually knows what they're doing, Ben, which is also mind-blowing when you consider all of the time being wasted with the coaches. And not enough time being put into figuring out who the general manager is and what is their vision and what is their coach of choice.
And that's really a key part of this component as well. When exactly does that hire happen of the GM? Does it happen before, simultaneously, after the hiring of the head coach? You would assume before, so that guy is on board with who his head coach is. So there is a mash-up in management, but it is the New York Jets. So here's where you'd actually be wrong, though, Joe Ranieri. Homedale, New Jersey is about 44 miles away from MetLife. So some of the great people working out at our New Jersey studios, not exactly in consideration. I have a better chance being here in New York City, and yet I have not received word from Woody Johnson or his son just yet. You mentioned all the head coaching interviews, 10 GM interviews already on the docket. Do you think, Joe, with where the New York Jets stand as an organization, 14 consecutive seasons missing the NFL postseason, it is the longest active drought by far in the National Football League, as we learned yesterday in a trivia game. The Colts, who last made the playoffs in 2020, is the second longest drought in the AFC, and the Jets have that beat by more than a decade virtually. In half of those 14 seasons, New York has won 5 games or fewer. Do you consider the Jets' job a desirable one in the NFL?
No, nobody considers it a desirable one because in all it is time frame, the only thing you're going to attract in New York are misfits, toss-aways, guys that are willing to do anything for a job. Why? Because they still haven't started from the top to work their way down. Ownership and Woody Johnson, one of the worst in the NFL. We all know it. There's dysfunction from the top, and when there's dysfunction starting at the top, if you don't get that straightened out, anything and everything else you do from that point on is just laughable, and that's exactly what the Jets are, laughable.
And so when you look at the 5 vacant jobs, including the New York Jets, the New Orleans Saints, the Chicago Bears, potentially the Dallas Cowboys included in this because they don't have a head coach as of next week at this moment, with no contract extension being offered to Mike McCarthy right now. And then the one that we learned yesterday, the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm not really sure which is the most desirable. Technically, you would think Chicago, first overall picking Caleb Williams, who showed some optimism and a pretty talented roster despite how disappointing this season was. But good things go to die, sadly, it seems, under the McCaskey family of this Bears organization. Everybody is already spooked by Trent Baalke continuing to be the GM in Duval County. Quotes yesterday from some potential head coaching candidates that have said there is no movement forward in Jacksonville as long as Baalke is there. That was a stunner around the NFL. I would say probably the Saints' job, but you don't really have the quarterback in place to really make it all that desirable. And then you've got the Jets and the Cowboys, which is also its own quandary because Jerry Jones still wants to be the alpha in every room.
And suddenly, Ben, Bill Belichick, the North Carolina, makes a ton of sense, does it not? Yes, it does, folks. And now you know why. Unbelievable. The vacancy is not one desirable job among them. It's not for a guy with a resume like Belichick anyway, but for the guys for like Rex Ryan, heck, it's gold rush time here, Ben. I mean, my interview with everybody, because all of those franchises are going nowhere fast.
I hope you get some free food, Rex, and get to enjoy your visits around the National Football League. Injury news for teams still playing. Good football teams that have reached the postseason. Again, difficult injury news for Green Bay on one front, more hopeful news on the other. Let's start with the bad. Christian Watson injured in the regular season finale against Chicago. He is having season-ending surgery to repairing a torn ACL. Not just bad news for the playoffs for the Pack, but putting his status in question for the start of 2025. But Jordan Love, who exited the game in the opening half and then was warming up on the sideline, Matt LaFleur said after the game that if it was truly necessary, Love could have stayed in the game. He is expected to be, quote, okay for Sunday in Philadelphia against the Birds.
Yeah, I don't like the okay because nothing about his play has been okay, or the play calling for that matter over the last couple of weeks here with the Packers. And now you're losing weapons. Yikes. Not exactly the best spot here for the Green Bay Packers heading into a big game against the Eagles. But like you said there, are we sure Jalen Hurts is playing in this game? Anybody?
So that's the quarterback matchup to pay attention to. Back to that graphic, pretty pleased. Jordan Love dealing with what Pro Football Doc Dr. David Chow called a funny bone contusion. Should be fine. Really no lingering effects. But there have been lingering effects for Jalen Hurts, who remains in concussion protocol. Injured now 3 weekends ago, early in the opening half, week 16, against the Washington Commanders. Not a big deal week 17 against the Cowboys to clinch the division, or, of course, last week in the finale against the New York Giants. Joe, it really becomes a story tomorrow when the practice week opens up on Wednesday if Hurts is not out there.
It's a big problem, yes. And the fact that he's still in the concussion protocol is a little concerning here because it's not exactly easy to get out of it, Ben. And if he's still in it, there's some issues there. So that's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles right now without him.
What changes in 48 to 72 hours that hasn't already evolved in the last couple of weeks to get him out of the protocol? Zay Flowers listed as day-to-day. That's coach speak. We don't expect to see Zay Flowers this weekend as Baltimore hosts the Steelers, or maybe even next weekend if they reach the divisional round. And again, I wonder, Joe, as we'll talk about the line a little bit later for that matchup Sunday in Philly between the Eagles and the Packers, if it is taking into account right now Jalen Hurts' status being up in the air, or if it is expecting Hurts to start 4.5-point spread in favor of the Eagles. Welcome to hour number 2, live right here on a Tuesday on the early line on SportsGrid. He is Joe Ranieri. I am Ben Stevens. In this second hour, the early line truly lives up to its name. It is a second hour dedicated to a preview and a breakdown of each, and I mean individually each and every segment of our 6 matchups during Super Wild Card Weekend to kick off the opening round of the NFL postseason. We will go game by game, our early insights to what we are seeing based on what the numbers are telling us, and our expectation to start the National Football League postseason. What a second hour it is going to be. The early lines of the NFL playoffs here on the early line.
Looking so very forward to this here, Ben, because I do think across the board in football that maybe, just maybe, the dogs could be barking this week. Enough with the chalk, Ben. We got to get some dogs barking and make a few bucks here this weekend.
Favorites had been killing it from about week 13 on until week number 18, but it really was the weekend of the dog, especially in those spots, Joe, where it was necessary for a team to win to secure a playoff berth or better their postseason seed. Those dogs were a barking, or the team that had already been eliminated from playoff contention. But that's a thing of the past. Now it is the postseason future and the outlook to start this opening round. Super Wild Card Weekend. 6 games this weekend, starting with a doubleheader on Saturday. 3 games on Sunday, a Monday nightcap in the City of Angels between the Rams and the Vikings. Death, taxes, and if the Texans make it to the AFC postseason and have to play during Wild Card Weekend, there'll be that first game on Saturday afternoon, as is the case once again to start the postseason here in 2024's NFL season, of course, in 2025. But Houston, even with home field advantage, Joe, is not the favorite That would be the LA Chargers, laying 2.5 points on the road in H-Town. Total stands at 42.5. Let's start with that spread. Let's start with the favored side. Do you believe the Chargers are a deserving favorite to kick off the postseason?
Yes, they are. Absolutely. Because Houston is not trustworthy. They're a hot mess, to be completely honest with you. And listen, give them credit. They won certainly enough games early in the season, Ben, to carry them in a very weak division and just hold their head above water enough to be able to get to this point. But you know, beating the Indies of the world or Tennessees of the world, yay, congratulations. But the reality is this is going to be big boy football, and nothing that Houston has done it has led me to believe that they are going to be somebody worth backing at this spot, even at home, simply because, Ben, they've been the worst ATS team in the second half of games this year. There is a coaching issue and a disconnect with that organization. That is not a team that I want to have to rely on making adjustments in the second half of a playoff game, Ben, in order to win and cash a ticket. They've shown they can't do it, and other teams outcoach them. Yeah, they deserve to be a big favorite in this one at home, even at home against this Chargers team.
Yeah, listen, I would agree with that statement, right? I would agree with what you are saying here on this Bolts team. Winners of 11 games this year. It is what Jim Harbaugh does better than most. He goes to an organization, whether it's the FCS level at San Diego, the FBS level for a dormant program at Stanford, or, of course, at Michigan, and he wins right away. It's what he did in San Francisco as well for the 49ers. Now here 11-6 for an LA team that sure made the postseason back in 2022, but coughed up a 27-zip lead against the Jacksonville Jaguars. A team in LA that had a win total of 8.5. Sure, unable to unseat the Chiefs atop the AFC West, but still a playoff bid, and now expected to maybe see the Chiefs in that divisional round in just a couple of weeks. But, Joe, I would agree. The Chargers are the deserving favorite. And let's look at these two teams where they stand in correspondence to what is expected of them. L.A. as the favorite, Houston as the underdog. With C.J. Stroud, since the start of last year, the Texans have been a great underdog. 10-7 against the spread. 7 outright victories as well in these past 2 seasons. But most of that was last year, which is kind of the story of this season for the Texans. A lot of offseason optimism after winning the AFC South in a playoff game with a rookie head coach in DeMeco Ryans and a rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud. So the expectation this year was not just divisional odds-on favorite. They made good on that, I guess you could say, with a 10-7 record in the poorest AFC South, but to be a true contender in the AFC. I would say entering the postseason, Joe, nobody expects Houston to even remotely contend for the conference championship right at this moment. And as an underdog, the Texans 2-3 against the spread this year. Both covers, sure, a cover, but not an outright victory. Meanwhile, the Chargers, when they were expected to win a game and beat up on inferior opponents, it's exactly what LA did. They are 10-2 against the spread as the favored side this year, covering by an average margin of 6 points per game. Listen, the public is in love with the Chargers right now. 89% of the money in terms of the spread for this matchup on FanDuel, all on the Bolts. But I do believe, again, it is the deserving side to see LA even as a road favorite to start our first of 6 matchups during Super Wildcard Weekend.
I got the better quarterback, the better coach, the better disciplined team here in the Chargers. Yes, it's on the road, but it doesn't matter. The experience factor on that coaching staff under Harbaugh. Listen, he understands how to win postseason games, right? Houston and DeMeco Ryans have not. And it didn't work out all that well in that playoff game last year. And it hasn't worked out well this year when they were the hunted instead of taking people by surprise. And nobody thought they would do anything. Well, everybody came hunting for you, and it's a different year. Unfortunately, it's one that I think they're just in over their head with this one. And could this be finally the Justin Herbert year that he finally breaks through because he's got the right coach in his corner?
He's playing that way right now. To start off the year, Greg Roman, the OC in LA, and Jim Harbaugh told you exactly what they were going to do. Take the onus off of Herbert. In the first 4 years of his career, had to do everything for the Chargers. They were going to run the football, be stout up front, and play good defense. They went under in 7 of their first 8. To end the year, though, the Bolts have gone over in 7 of their final 9, and Justin Herbert a big reason why. At least 281 passing yards in the last 3 games for LA. Multiple passing touchdowns, including 3 in that span in the last 4 games. Each of those last 4 games. You see the numbers there. It's the same exact yardage prop for Herbert and C.J. Stroud. Herbert had only thrown for multiple passing touchdowns 4 times in the first 13 games for L.A. Now 4 consecutive games to end out the year with multiple passing scores. Meanwhile, Joe, C.J. Stroud, as compared to his NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year season last year, fewer yards, worse completion percentage, fewer touchdowns, more picks, worse quarterback rating, worse QBR, and a lot more sacks. It has not been a good year in his sophomore campaign for Stroud.
Yeah, no, it's not. And also a lot less weapons, more injuries, and a much worse offensive line, Ben. Much worse.
Much worse. Much worse. And that's really been the issue. Sacked 38 times during his rookie season a year ago. Sacked 52 times in 2024. And the Chargers can get after the quarterback. More on the early line next. We continue to preview each and every game, all 6 matchups that we have to kick off the NFL postseason and Super Wild Card Weekend. Doubleheader on Saturday. First up, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time in Houston. The Texans host the Chargers, as we have shared. L.A., a 2.5-point road favorite. Not the story for the nightcap on Saturday. In fact, it is the largest spread. It is Wild Card Weekend and a divisional duel between the Ravens and the Steelers. Again, Baltimore is the biggest favorite of the entirety of the weekend, all 6 matchups included. 9.5-point spread in favor of the Flock, the total 44 and a hook. Joe, these 2 teams know each other incredibly well. So when you see that 9.5-point spread, for how often these games are often competitive, is it too large? Or does it feel fitting for a reason for where these 2 teams stand entering the NFL playoffs?
It's always fitting for a reason, Ben. They're almost a double-digit dog for a reason. This, to me, is pretty simple. We've got 2 teams heading in completely opposite directions. And before you start quoting me any great Mike Tomlin numbers as a dog and all of this stuff, and just look at what Tomlin's record over the last couple of years is in the playoffs, guys. It's terrible. And why is it terrible? Because this team tends to run out of gas when it matters the most, unfortunately. They are taking in a 4-game losing streak and an offense that is completely lost. And we're not talking lost as in, oh, they'll be fine, Ben. They'll just flip a switch and everything will be good. No, this team is lost. Russ looks cooked, which was always the biggest concern the minute that they went to him and traded for him and started him, that this wasn't a version of Russ that was going to show up at some point. Unfortunately for the Steelers, it showed up at the worst time at the end of the year. Now they're rolling into a game with a team that is rolling the other way, has the better defense, better quarterback, better offense at home. This has got route written all over it here, Ben. Sorry, Steelers. What you have done in the past doesn't matter anymore. What have you done for me lately? And the answer, Ben, is absolutely nothing.
Of course, these 2 teams split their season series when things were going well for the Steelers at home in Pittsburgh, even as a home underdog, catching about 3 points in the Steel City. Russ in Pittsburgh won outright against Baltimore as that underdog, 18-16. But that was at home as a dog. The last time these 2 teams played, just a couple of weekends ago. Of course, as we know it, in Pittsburgh in in Baltimore in week 16, the Ravens were a touchdown favorite. They covered that number, winning by 3 scores, 34-17, over a total around 44 and a hook, which is where the total is this time. Joe, we'll get to the points we expect in just a moment. But since 2011, between these two bitter rivals in the AFC North, there have only been 2 spreads. This will be the third. There have only been 2 spreads north of a touchdown. We were at a full touchdown for the most recent matchup a couple of weekends ago in week 16, but only 2 times since 2011 north of 2 touchdowns. Most recently in 2020, the Ravens were the double-digit dog on the road in Pittsburgh, ended up covering that number. And in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, back in 2015, the Ravens actually won outright as a double-digit dog against the Steelers. Very different things this time around. But familiarity, of course, is a part of consideration and where these two teams enter this matchup. Baltimore playing great football down the stretch. Lamar Jackson looking like an NFL MVP contender once again. You see the numbers there. The Ravens defense getting better. The offense is elite. For the Steelers, very different story, Joe. They have dropped 4 straight games to end out the regular season after winning 6 of the first 7 starts that Russell Wilson made, including that upset outright victory against the Ravens back in the Steel City. In those games, Pittsburgh, in the first 7 starts that Russ had made, had scored at least 26 points in 5 of 7. In their 4 games to end out the year, just 1-7 against the spread as well, all as an underdog, scoring 17 points or fewer, Joe, in those 4 straight L's to end out the regular season.
Yeah, the thing to me as well, Ben, is I do think that the Ravens defense is maybe the most underrated crew heading into these playoffs. Why? Because of the rough start that they had through the first month and a half of the season. But while nobody was paying attention and everyone's talking about Lamar and Derrick Henry and this offense, and that's all fine and dandy. But the reality is, this defense over the last couple of months, Ben, has been absolutely lights out. And for a struggling quarterback and offense like Russ Wilson is going to be bringing to the table here on the road in that environment, that defense is going to be hungry. And on the flip side, that Pittsburgh defense has fallen off a cliff, Ben, over the last month. Again, 2 teams heading in totally different directions. To think they can flip a switch and become playoff Mike Tomlin and Pittsburgh Steelers, I think you're out of your mind.
Listen, Joe, I would have to agree. By the way, Zach Orr, the new defensive coordinator for Baltimore, former Ravens linebacker and linebackers coach under Mike McDonald the last few seasons. They have figured whatever it was they needed to fix. He's really young. I think he's 31 or 32. They have done a great job with the Ravens. And last time these two teams met back in week 16, being decided by 3 scores, seeing this spread at 9.5 points for a playoff game between the Ravens and the Steelers is alarming, because prior to week 16, the previous 9 meetings between Pittsburgh and Baltimore, all decided by a single score. 5 of the 9, a field goal or fewer. But again, you see the Ravens as a touchdown favorite in week 16. It wasn't even close to enough. 9.5, the largest spread of all of Super Wild Card Weekend, as Joe said at the very start of this breakdown, does feel rather fitting. We'll continue to go around Super Wild Card Weekend and our final game of 3 in the AFC. The Buccaneers next. Live right here on the Early Line on SportsGrid. Again, the Early Line living up to its name. The early lines early on this week for Super Wild Card Weekend in the National Football League. The structure of the weekend, the opening round of the postseason. 2 games on Saturday, each in the AFC. 3 games on Sunday, where the first is an AFC matchup between the 2 seed, the Bills, and the 7 seed, the Broncos. Then we get to all of the games within the NFC. So the first 3 out of the AFC, the final 3 of the weekend hailing from the NFC. Joe, and in the AFC, we've got two very large numbers, the two largest numbers of the weekend, the only two numbers that are higher than 5 points. We talked about Baltimore, largest favorite of the weekend, hosting Pittsburgh, 9.5-point spread. The Bills hosting the Broncos, an 8.5-point number to kick off our triple header on Sunday in Orchard Park. Total stands at 47.5. For the Broncos to be here is a season of success with a rookie quarterback, year number 2 at Mile High under Sean Payton. But, Joe, as the odds makers expect, that's probably the end of the road for Denver. This begins what Buffalo is hoping can be a historic postseason, a 5th consecutive AFC East divisional crown. But unlike the previous 4, this time the Bills are hoping to get to a Super Bowl and not be ousted by their postseason nemesis, the Kansas City Chiefs. What do you make of the opening round matchup between the Bills and the Broncos on Sunday?
Well, I get ready for points, man, because I would imagine this game is going to fly over this total. Another one if you can get 8.5, you better lock it into a teaser now, because it won't be there as we get closer to kickoff, Ben, because the books will protect against those 8.5s down to under a field goal for Buffalo as best they can. So don't be shocked if this thing is 9.5 by the time we get the kickoff. And again, another one of these situations where it's warranted. I mean, kudos to Sean Payton, coach of the year, rookie quarterback. Nobody saw them doing this. But the reality is, at this point in the season, Ben, experience matters. And there is no more experienced team than what Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills are going to bring to the table. The Broncos are celebrating their first playoff appearance in, 8 years? Yay! The reality is you're going to lose this game. You're probably going to lose it epically, not because you're a terrible team or to take anything away from what they did, but there are levels to this here, Ben. And right now, Denver they've got to go through some growing pains with Bo Nix and this young squad. I do think they're going to have some success scoring points, but ultimately it's Josh Allen and the Bills that pull away, cover this number, and get it up and over to 47.5.
Yeah, Joe, I think it's hard to fault that thought as well. You are right. Denver playing in its first NFL postseason since 2015 when Peyton Manning was under center and the Broncos won a Super Bowl. This was a Denver team that entered the season with a 5.5 win total. To be here is a resounding success. To find the future of your franchise in Bo Nix, a resounding success. But it probably comes to the end of the road in Western New York on Sunday. Just to note, it is January in Orchard Park. Not expecting snow, maybe a dusting on Saturday, but by Buffalo weather standards, pretty good Sunday. Wind, less than 10 miles per hour, 30 degrees, cloudy. Not all that shabby for Western New York to kick off our triple header on Sunday afternoon. And, Joe, it could be a resounding statement for Josh Allen. NFL MVP consideration is a regular season thing, but a time to prove that he is the true winner of this award. He will enter the postseason at the end of the regular season as a minus 470 favorite to win the NFL MVP hardware, the first of his career, hoping for even more postseason accolades to get Buffalo back to a Super Bowl. In 2020, they reached the AFC Championship game, bounced by the Chiefs. The last 3 years, the end of the road for the Bills in that divisional round. Quickly, Joe, on Buffalo, do you think their playoff outlook looks different this time around in 2024?
Absolutely. I've been saying it all year. This looks and feels like a different Buffalo team. The moment is not going. This is why experience matters. Ben, in the playoffs, you've got to lose before you can win sometimes, and I think Buffalo is ready to take that next step.
Right now, Buffalo has the second best price to win the AFC at plus 250. less than $1 behind Kansas City. Now to the NFC side of things up next. We go game by game in chronological order for Super Wild Card Weekend to kick off the NFL postseason. In the opening half hour of our second hour here on this Tuesday morning on the early line, we previewed the first 3 games of the weekend, all conveniently in the AFC. Now, starting with our second of 3 of our Sunday tripleheader, we transition to the other conference. In the NFC, it's the 2 seed Philadelphia and the 7 seed the Green Bay Packers. Joe, earlier on in the show, we showed you the injury news around the NFL. Jordan Love, a right elbow injury, a contusion from this past Sunday that does not seem to be all that serious, and he is expected to play this weekend. But not great news when your quarterback has injury questions starting off the postseason. But you could say the same thing for Jalen Hurts and Philadelphia. Exited the opening half of the Eagles' last loss of the year back in Week 16 against the Washington Commanders in concussion protocol. Did not play Week 17. It was Kenny Pickett. They clinched the division against the Cowboys. So nobody needed to play in week number 18. So it was Tanner McKee against the Giants and still a victory for the Birds. So we didn't really check in on Jalen Hurts. We just knew that he remained in concussion protocol, but probably a precaution, right, to get ready for the postseason. Well, as of yesterday afternoon, Hurts still in concussion protocol. Tomorrow begins the full practice week for Philadelphia. If we see a DNP or a limited participant on that practice report, what will that mean for Hurts' status to start off the postseason? And Joe, what would that mean for the spread? I posed the question kind of to you to end off one of those segments in the opening hour. Is this 4.5-point number the largest spread of our 3 matchups in the NFC, by the way? Is it taking into account that Jalen Hurts' status is uncertain, or that Hurts expects to be ready to go on Sunday afternoon? What say you?
Well, I don't think it'll get to a touchdown, Ben, if that's what people are thinking. I do think that defensively, and I think the way to approach this is via the total in this game. Because whether Jalen Hurts plays or doesn't play, Ben, to me, this is a dead under game. The Philadelphia defense is what's going to elevate this team and carry it through any sort of turmoil with or inability of Jalen Hurts to be able to play here. No Christian Watson means now all of a sudden that limits the Packers' explosiveness for big plays down the field here. I do love what Green Bay has done defensively, but also Jair Alexander not going to be playing also for Green Bay. I just think that this is 2 teams that are going to run the ball, 2 teams that are going to limit what the other team wants to do defensively. So if I'm looking at this game, whether Jalen Hurts plays or not, I'm backing the under, and I would get it now, Ben, because if he's not playing, I think the biggest move is going to be on the total. It's not going to be on the side. I think Philadelphia is still your favorite one way or the other here. And if he does get announced that he's playing, again, I don't know that the total moves all that much, but I bet you this thing gets closer to maybe 5.5, 6 if he is announced.
It would be really interesting, Joe, to see what happens to the spread and total movement with the clarification, if you will, on Jalen Hurts' status. Again, Jordan Love expects to play. Christian Watson now out for the remainder of this season. His status, even for early 2025, is in question. But Hurts is in concussion protocol. Unless he clears protocol, he cannot go. Is that status going to change in the next 48 to 72 hours? If it does not, what happens to the line? I'd say it would dip under 3, but still probably see Philadelphia closing as a favorite against Green Bay. Maybe back to 3.5. I'm not sure. If he plays, could it get closer to 5.5, 6.5? The line opened up at 3.5 in favor of Philadelphia. 45.5 is an intriguing total. Joe, these 2 teams will maybe end their season, at least for one of them, against one another, where their season started. But in Sao Paulo, it was that Brazilian opener on a Friday night. Philadelphia victorious 34-29 in a high-scoring game. But nobody could get a grip on that slippery surface in Brazil. Meanwhile, for the Packers this year, as an underdog, they've been darn good. 3-2 against the spread, including a couple of outright victories. But those outright victories with Malik Willis. Only booked as a dog were the Packers twice with Jordan Love, and a true underdog, 2 points or greater, a slight pick'em price against Minnesota a couple of weekends ago. But both of those games for Green Bay as the dog against Detroit. 1 cover, but 2 losses outright. If you even include closing as a slight underdog against the Vikings, they lost that game outright as well. So the Packers not expected to win against the best competition this year. Green Bay has really faltered. Just 1-5 in the NFC North. Conveniently, a division where they went winless against those 2 other teams, the Vikings and the Lions, that have won at least 14 games, which is what Philly has done as well.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, Green Bay, they had to endure a injury to Jordan Love to start the year, Ben, but then Matt LaFleur works his magic, brings in Malik Willis, and somehow steals a couple of wins there, buys enough time to be able to get Jordan Love back, and voila, they were off and running. I mean, defensively, they've been great, but the Packers have been very good against lesser competition here. You mentioned it. Their record against the teams in their own division, the better competition, not great. This will be one of the best defenses that they're going to see. Not having Watson hurts, but I think they've established a running game this year for a reason. And I do think they're going to lean on that running game, though, to try and do anything they can in order to wear down that defense of the Eagles. Good luck. I think this is going to be one of those old-fashioned January cold weather games where whoever wins the trenches is going to win this game, but it ain't going to be high scoring. I can promise you that.
Whether or not expected to be great Sunday afternoon in Philadelphia, that's something to consider as well. Outdoor playoff football. The Eagles, the 2 seed. Of course, Green Bay plays at the frozen tundra. That is not overly shocking news to this Packers organization. Both teams stout defensively. You see where things stand for both of these teams, both allowing fewer than 20 points per game on average. The Eagles, one of the best scoring defenses in all of the NFL. And, Joe, I just would say as well, Philadelphia started this year 2-2, right? Some questions. Where was this Eagles team in the opening month? They won 12 of their last 13 to end out the regular season, covering in 8 of those 12 wins, under in 8 of their last 13 games as well. Defense being the main reason why. Joe, let me ask you about the NFC as a whole. The Lions will enter the postseason as the short favorites to win the conference championship. Does it feel like a tier of 2, or is it more uncertain to you and up in the air in the NFC? Is it the Lions and the Eagles in the NFC championship, or might we see a couple of other teams be able to make some noise?
Yeah, I find the Rams fascinating here, given their path and their ability defensively. Another one of these teams that got better as the season went on defensively. Ton of experience, great coaching, Super Bowl winning quarterback. The Rams have all the ingredients to be that dark horse. But so does Tampa. I mean, what else can we say about Tampa, Ben? They've been there. They've done that.
For sure.
Tampa could very well play spoiler to some of those teams on the left-hand column there, Ben.
To me, that's where the value lies in the NFC. Those prices on teams that have a postseason pedigree. The Buccaneers in a home game, the Rams in a home game. We'll talk about Tampa's home game up next against the rookie QB, Jaden Daniels, and the Washington Commanders. On the other side of the break here on SportsGrid. We continue with our preview and breakdown of each of the 6 matchups to kick off the NFL postseason, the opening round, or better yet, now known as Super Wild Card Weekend. 3 days of NFL playoff action, a doubleheader on Saturday, a tripleheader on Sunday, and a Monday nightcap we will get to up next. Sunday Night Football in Tampa, Florida. It's the Buccaneers, the champions of the NFC South for a fourth consecutive season, hosting the Rook, Jalen Daniels, and first-year head coach outside the nation's capital, that being Dan Quinn. These two teams also played each other way back in week number 1, much like the Packers and the Eagles. It was a welcome to the NFL moment for Jalen Daniels, who struggled in that game, one of the few games he looked like a rookie this year. Tampa victorious in a big way, 37-20. The Buccaneers covering as the favored side in that matchup. And once again, the Bucs a favorite, a flat 3. That field goal number in favor of Baker and his Buccaneers, the highest total of Super Wild Card weekend at 50.5. Joe, what are the numbers telling you for this 3-6 matchup in the NFC?
Hurry up and bet the over. Just bet the over, folks. Forget about who wins the game. Bet the over. And here's why. Now, I'll give Dan Quinn credit defensively. They have improved. I think having Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu there, having that stability in the linebacker position has really helped this defense. But the problem is the secondary, they don't have, even when they made the trade there with New Orleans, they don't have any playmakers. This is not what I would consider a playoff defense, right? Which is odd because it's Dan Quinn, who's a defensive guy. But there's only so much at this point that you can work with. And on the flip side, you've got a Tampa team, another defensive-minded head coach in Todd Bowles, who's great against the run, but that secondary is just as bad as Washington's, which means this is going to be a shootout. You got Baker Mayfield, experienced, versus Jalen Daniels, great season, but a rookie. Bucs at home. They've been in a ton of shootouts here. I think the inability to be able to run the ball for Washington is what's going to cause them problems. They're going to ask too much of Jalen Daniels. Ultimately, I think they'll fall short. But this should be a fun one as all the props in the world, Ben. Give me Bucky Irving overs. Give me Mayfield over. Jalen Daniels over. Evans. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot in this one, I believe.
The Commanders, despite having a rookie quarterback, a preseason win total around 7 and a hook, and a first-year head coach in Dan Quinn, only an underdog by the end of the year 6 times. 3, 2, and 1 against the spread, but all 3 covers an outright victory, most recently in week number 16, winning outright in Philadelphia. Now, for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as a favorite this season for Baker Mayfield and the Bucs, the numbers, not all that crazy, 5-4 against the spread. But here's where Tampa's playoff pedigree comes into the conversation. Todd Bowles has been there now for a while, leading the Bucs to multiple divisional crowns. Baker last year picking up where Tom Brady had left off, leading Tampa to the NFC South Divisional Championship and a playoff win at home against another NFC East team, that being the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the number is fair. It is a flat number of 3, a key number in NFL circles. We'll see how critical it is come Sunday night. What can we expect, Joe, of Jalen Daniels, who is going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, no doubt, and has looked phenomenal in the most clutch of spots each and every step of the way throughout his first year in the NFL. But a playoff stage is a significant beast to itself. 235 in a hook is his prop through the air. 1.5 passing touchdowns, and of course, utilizing his legs. 45.5 on the ground. What is your expectation for Washington's rookie signal caller in his first ever playoff game come Sunday night?
Listen, the kid has been phenomenal. I mean, I had said it, Ben, on this show from the draft on, that I thought he was going to be the talk of last year's draft. While I wasn't a big Caleb Williams fan. I'm still not a Caleb Williams fan, but I said Jalen Daniels is going to be the one guy in this draft that teams wish they had spent more time with. Bo Nix, another guy. Obviously, we've seen how well he's done as a rookie. But you got 2 rookie quarterbacks in the postseason on teams, Ben, that are not used to being in the postseason. The Broncos haven't been there forever, and guess what? Neither has Washington. So what's going to happen is I have a feeling both those teams are going to have to rely on their rookie quarterbacks to do more than what they're capable of. And I think ultimately they're going to ask Jaden Daniels to do a lot in this game. I do think the passing yards is a little light given the fact that I see them trailing in this game, not playing from in front. So I do think any sort of passing yards prop, even passing TDs, I think that is a pretty good look with him because I think he's going to be playing from behind here, Ben.
Washington, the third best passing defense statistically this year in terms of yardage allowed per game. But Baker's prop feels a little bit light as well, 238.5 for a guy that has gone over that number with at least 280 in 5 of the final 7 for Tampa Bay. Multiple passing touchdowns for Baker in each of the last 5 games for the Buccaneers as well, albeit with interceptions thrown in 4 of those 5 games as well. A really intriguing matchup for a Buccaneers team, Joe. It's a lot different than the teams we saw under Tom Brady or even last year in Mayfield's first year in Tampa. They run the football so much better with Bucky Irving against a Washington team that has been exposed at times on the ground this season. Keep an eye on that. And also keep an eye on a matchup that we love individually. Marshawn Lattimore, now a member of the Commanders secondary, against Mike Evans on the other side for the Buccaneers. They have quite a heated history, if you will. Some conversation that if Lattimore was still in New Orleans last week, ain't no way Mike Evans getting that final 9-yard reception to get to 1K. Well, now, here we are in the postseason. The Monday night cap, the Super Wild Card weekend in L.A. Next. Live right here on the early line on SportsGrid. It is our final segment in hour number 2. It has gone exactly to plan. Each and every segment, all 6 in this second hour, a preview of each and every game on Super Wild Card weekend. The first 5 in the books. So let's get to the Monday night cap inside SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. The Rams and the Vikings. Minnesota, a 14-win team. But the 5 seed in the NFC playoff bracket has to go on the road to start off its postseason. And they will do so as an ever-so-slight favorite against Matthew Stafford in the NFC West winning Rams. Total 47.5. Joe, when this line first came out, it was 2.5 points already in favor of the Vikes. Already, we have seen market movement back to L.A. How do you approach the 6th and final game of the opening round of the NFL postseason?
Yeah, well, this is where it's going to get interesting, right? On this Monday night game where you've got maybe the worst matchup for Minnesota, having to go on the road to take on this kind of experienced team in the Rams, whose defense, Ben, ended the year as one of the best in the NFL at getting to the quarterback, rushing the quarterback, and not giving up a ton of points here down the stretch. So this young defense really came together and became quietly one of the best defenses in the NFL at the end. And we just watched the Vikings and what happens when you get pressure on Sam Darnold, didn't we? That offensive line was always the concern with the Minnesota Vikings when they lost Darashaw and others there. What was going to happen? Well, you haven't played great defenses, but boy, they got Anzalone back, and they were all over. They went after Sam Darnold. What do you think the Rams are going to do at home? They're going to go after Sam Darnold. I don't know that Sam Darnold has an answer for that. If Sam Darnold gets all day to throw, then guess what? He's pretty dangerous. I think he's proven that. But I don't think the Rams are going to let him. I think Stafford and company are going to have success. Because you're going to what? Blitz Stafford and think he's not going to tear you apart? I think this is a terrible matchup for Minnesota. I think the wrong team happens to be favored in it as well.
And it's moving that way, Joe. And maybe you're thinking, all right, a lot of people are considering that to be the case, that the Rams should be the slight home favorite even at home. 54% of the money on Minnesota in terms of the spread, 65% of the overall bets backing Sammy D. And the Vikings. Joe, I would have to agree. And really, when you look at the Rams as an underdog, you can point to the first matchup against Minnesota as the turning point of this entire season for Los Angeles that led them to be back into the playoffs. The Rams in the opening month and a half of this year, incredibly banged up. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, the entirety of the offensive line, it felt, trying to protect the veteran Matthew Stafford. The Rams started 1-4. Then in week number 6, they beat the Raiders on a Sunday. Didn't cover, ugly game. Did just enough to win 20-15. The story of the season, Joe, was a short week Thursday night game at home in SoFi against this trending Vikings team that had started a perfect 5-0, had just dropped its first game of the year when Minnesota dropped a second consecutive. They were a 2.5-point favorite on the road in L.A. The Rams won outright 30-20. But the Rams down the stretch in the final 4 games of the year were elite defensively. Well, after they gave up 42 to the Bills and won by scoring 44 points. They only allowed these many points in their last 3 games with the full starters out there. 6 to San Francisco, 9 on the road to the New York Jets, 9 back at home against the Arizona Cardinals. And in 2 of those games I just mentioned, against the Bills and the Niners on a short week, the Rams won outright as an underdog. Since that start of the year, a 1-4 start for LA, they've been a dog 4 times. 3-1 against the spread, 3-1 outright as well. They did cover as a touchdown dog in the regular season finale against Seattle, so technically 4-1 against the spread. But in terms of when everybody is played and the Rams are getting points, it's been a recipe for success for Los Angeles this year.
Yeah, no, it has. And again, I'm a big believer in experience matters this time of year, Ben. And you've got a ton of experience on that side of the ball here. So I think Stafford, McVay, Puka Nacua, the weapons, they can go toe-to-toe with anybody. It's the defense that's going to make the difference.
I expected more overreaction for the Vikings getting beat bad in Detroit, but the public's still betting Minnesota. That is intriguing. Hour 3 comes away next. Live right here on the early line on SportsGrid. We welcome you to hour number 3, our third and final here on TEL. He is Joe Ranieri. I am Ben Stevens. A second hour dedicated to the early line previews, the show living up to its billing of all 6 NFL playoff matchups during Super Wild Card Weekend. And it's still the early line, at least to start here in this opening half hour of our third and final. A preview of the College Football Playoff Semifinals, which begin once again on Thursday night in Miami, Joe's neck of the woods. Boots on the ground for the Orange Bowl between Penn State and Notre Dame. And Friday evening in the Lone Star State, it's the in-state team and the Longhorns of Texas taking on the Buckeyes of Ohio State. The early line preview and breakdown of both of our 2 CFP semis this upcoming week. We'll also talk some NBA action, some hardwood handicaps around college basketball, and later on in the hour, John Rothstein joins us to break down what is a lovely Tuesday night slate in the month of January with conference action all over the country, Joe.
Yeah, and I think shaping up to be one heck of a finale and crowning of a national championship here in college football, Ben. These 2 games I'm looking very, very forward to here. But keeping in mind, the chalk has reigned in this year's college football playoffs. Been all about the chalk here, Ben. We'll see if that changes.
Only one dog has even covered a number. That was Arizona State in double overtime of that first quarterfinal on New Year's Day in the Peach Bowl against Texas. But no dogs outright. That's 1-7 against the spread, by the way, in our 8 first matchups that we have seen in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. Might some dogs be barking during the opening round of the NFL postseason? And what might it mean for the conference championship races in both the AFC and the NFC to decide a Super Bowl champion during the 2024 NFL season? It was our question to you, the AFC or the NFC. Which one is more compelling? We find out together and fade the public. at SportsGrid on Twitter, entering the playoffs, which conference race is more intriguing, the NFC or the AFC? Your two options available. And most of the public, nearly 55% of the votes, backing the NFC. A little bit more intrigue in that side of the NFL than the AFC. Joe, I agreed with the public. Which way did you vote?
No, I do not. I agree with no. I think the most intriguing situation is coming out of the AFC. You actually have a team for the first time in a trillion years that could go 3 for 3 in Super Bowls. You've got a Chiefs team here who a lot of people thought would take a step back this year, and yet they rattle off a 15-2 regular season. And they have, again, the same old foes have to go at them. Baltimore or Buffalo. Will either of those two teams be able to get past the reigning champs, the Kansas City Chiefs? If they can't, Ben, then there is no bigger story than the Chiefs going for number 3 here. I think I think the AFC provides way more drama leading up to the big game. And then if it's Kansas City left standing, what's the bigger storyline come Super Bowl Sunday? There is no bigger storyline than Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs once again sitting on top of the world and possibly doing something we haven't seen for a while here in the NFL.
Yep, that is very, very true, Joe. I would agree because that is the story in the AFC. It is that tier of 3 that really has represented itself throughout the entirety of this season in some form or fashion or order. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens. There were times where Baltimore had the second best price ahead of Buffalo. There were times the Bills were the favorites to win the AFC championship, even in front of their playoff nemesis, that being Kansas City. But I think one of the reasons maybe the public is fading that idea, although it is pretty close, is because it is the same teams. It is that familiarity. But with that, it can be a very compelling story as well because the Chiefs have the benefit of the doubt. The Chiefs have the postseason pedigree. The Chiefs have the playoff and Super Bowl success. 6 years with Patrick Mahomes as the starting quarterback. This is year number 7. All 6 seasons, the Chiefs have played in the AFC Championship game. 4 of those 6, a Super Bowl appearance. 3 of those 4, a Lombardi trophy. And unlike last year, where does the AFC title run through this season? That would be Arrowhead, where it was the first 5 years. The Chiefs proved they could win at home in KC Mo, and then last year proved they could go on the road even when they were not expected to as an underdog and beat both Buffalo and Baltimore. It is a time for the Bills and the Ravens, likewise, Joe, to prove things they have not so far and turn around the narrative of lack of playoff success. Buffalo has now won the AFC East for a 5th straight season. In the previous 4, they have been bounced by the Chiefs 3 of the 4 years. They have been bounced in the divisional round each of the last 3. They have yet to play in a Super Bowl with Josh Allen as a starting quarterback and an AFC East winning quarterback. Lamar Jackson, despite being the 1 seed each last season and way back in 2019, each of the 2 years when he has individually won the NFL MVP award, they are just 2-4, that being the Ravens in terms of their overall playoff record. You can see how closely tied these 3 teams are at the top. The 3 top seeds, the 3 best prices, separated by less than $1.50 to win the AFC championship. But what does stand out, Joe, about the NFC is the perceived idea it is up in the air. And really that starts during Wild Card Weekend. All 3 of the games feature a spread of 4.5 or fewer. In fact, the Rams as a home team are an underdog, but just getting a 1.5 against the Vikings. The Bucs just a flat field goal favorite against the Commanders. The largest spread is Philadelphia as a 4.5-point home favorite against Green Bay. If it is a little bit tighter, it's expected to be more competitive, and thus, Joe, maybe some upsets abound in the NFC side of things.
Yeah, and listen, there is no doubt there is some intrigue here in the NFC because I also think it's much more wide open in the NFC than the AFC, to your point, Ben. And yes, if there is a dark horse coming from to win a championship, it's probably not coming from the AFC. It's going to be coming from the NFC. So could the Rams or the Bucs make a run at this? Or the Lions are just too easy to be chalky here. Could anybody else on that list actually overtake them? From a betting perspective, very intriguing here. From a overall narrative, my goodness, what does it say about the state of the NFL if one team can be that dominant over this stretch? Oh, wait a minute. The Patriots did that. Did Tom Brady? Oh, yeah, that's right. Never mind, Ben. It happens every decade, apparently.
Yeah, it is really what we are going to see still in Kansas City. Joe, I still find it unlikely, at least at this stage, I would say not worth a bet or a wager on KC not winning the AFC. Until I see the Bills or the Ravens change it, I don't think there is actually value on either of their prices. The NFC is where you can find it. But I do really think, despite the Vikings having a sensational season, the Packers having a great season, the value is really with the Bucs and the Rams in my estimation. But I still expect it to be the Lions and the Eagles, 1 versus 2 in the NFC Championship game in just a few weeks.